I found it while replacing some floorboards in my bedroom. It was a metal case that had become rusted over who knows how long. I opened it up, expecting to find some old books, an old map, or whatever. What I found instead were 3 sheets of paper. Each of them were yellow, clearly well worn out by time. The year 1528 was written on the bottom right corner of each of them, which made a ton of sense. 2 of the 3 pages were filled with writing in some language I wasn't fluent in. The 3rd page, however, had writing I could understand. It was a list of calendar dates with names beside them. The earliest one was January 16th, 1529, with the name Kingston written beside it. There were dozens of these calendar dates and names on the page, 2 rows of them side by side. I flipped the page over to find there were just as many calendar dates on that side as well. They too were listed in 2 rows. The front side of the page had dates going up to March 16th, 1765. The back side had dates going up to January 1st, 2029. I was curious as to who these were for. It looked like a randomized list. Whoever wrote these wrote them for a reason, but what was it? The closest day to the present day was April 29th, 2023, which, at the time I read it on the paper, was the next day. I didn't think anything of it. It looked totally arbitrary to me. What were the surnames all about? I set the pages back into the box, then I went on with my business. The next day, or more specifically, earlier today, I was sweeping my kitchen while letting some music play on the TV. As I went on with cleaning, the song that was playing slowed down. At first, I thought it was a glitch. There was no version of that song that suddenly slowed down like that halfway through. The song got abnormally slower and slower until it sounded like animalistic screeching. I turned my attention to the TV. The screech-like noises gave me chills, so I changed the channel to a different music channel. The same screeching was playing on that one too. I texted my friend Ashley, but she told me they weren't hearing any screeching. It just says laugh out loud. I turned the TV off. In the absence of the TV's noise, I heard an ominous hum. It sounded like it was coming from outside. I walked up to the window, but it was too foggy to see anything. As I pondered the source of the noise, a cracking noise came from behind me. I looked back and saw that my TV screen was cracked. Right in the middle of all the cracks was something that confused me: teeth. There were regular human-like teeth sticking out of the screen. I heard something shatter behind me. I turned around and saw the ceiling light cover had shattered all over the floor. One of the pieces had a similar set of teeth growing out of it, with veins growing inside the glass, which appeared to be melting. What on this green earth is happening? I whispered to myself. I then heard what sounded like the shattering of the mirror in the bathroom. I was already weirded out by what I had seen so far. I didn't need to use the bathroom, so I wasn't going in there. There was no way I wasn't going to talk to anybody about this. I took a picture of the teeth, then sent it to my friend. A minute later, he responded to me with a string of messages. The same thing is happening to me. They're everywhere. I was just bitten by a shard of a kitchen plate. I'm bleeding right now. They bite. Once that was implied, I went cold. I swept up the shards of glass and dumped them in the trash bin. One of the plates in the cupboard made a sound. Not seeing this stuff happening was unnerving. I opened the cupboard and took the plate. As I set it down on the counter, I took a look at the site. The plate was shattered, with one of the pieces of course being adorned with teeth. This time, red veins were protruding from the piece as the piece melted. Maybe melted isn't the right term, more like it changed material, if that makes sense. The roar of a helicopter went right over the house. After it passed, there was a knock at the door, followed by a woman's voice. Please answer the door. This is an urgent matter. I answered the door. A woman in a suit stood on my doorstep holding an FBI badge. A scientific division of the FBI has detected a brash anomaly within this town, and so we will be closing it off, she said with urgency. You cannot leave the town without special permission. You will be notified face to face when the quarantine has been lifted. So, this is about the teeth, I said. We understand the teeth are concerning, and we will be doing whatever we can to stop them from growing, she said. I'll definitely be keeping up with the news, I said. We're going to be keeping this investigation, along with the anomaly, under seal until we've determined it's appropriate to release information about them to the public," she said. "Have a good day." She walked away into the fog. I shut the door, thinking about the fact that the government was watching this. A slight pit formed in my stomach as it occurred to me that this situation was so special, the FBI had to cover it up for a while. Most people wouldn't know about this event for years, considering the FBI only releases information when there's a public interest group or an FOIA request remanded by the Justice Department. Where does this anomaly even come from? As I thought to myself, the bag covering the inside of the trash bin began moving until there was this tiny little ripping noise. Then I saw movement in the corner of my eye. It was the plate shard crawling by the sink. Its teeth were moving in a biting motion. A pit formed in my stomach. I reached into the cupboard for a cup to place on the thing like it was a bug, but every single cup had that freaky mouth on it. One of the cups happened to shatter as I was looking. I managed to sweep all that stuff into the garbage and threw it all outside. I threw the TV outside as well. The tickling I felt on the palm of my hand as I carried the TV by its sides didn't make me feel any better. Back inside, I put a cleaner pair of shoes on just in case I would accidentally step on one of those mouth things while walking between rooms. Luckily, my phone was still working and didn't have a mouth. My friend sent me a photo of the inside of the back of his TV. Veins had wrapped around everything, and the batteries were bloated. I felt like puking. All of a sudden, everything was turning into a living thing. I took a hammer outside and smashed my TV a dozen times. Purple blood began dripping out of the cracks. I went back inside, not planning on even looking at that TV again. I sat on my couch, looking around to make sure no mutant creatures were crawling around in at least the living room. I texted Ashley about the thing going on in town. She lived only one town over, so she wouldn't have been caught up in this, or informed at all. After I hit send, my message wouldn't go through. It kept giving me an error message. As I grew annoyed with the error, I recalled the sheet of paper with the dates. It couldn't be. Was it really hinting at what was happening today? I fished the paper out and looked at the date again. April 29th, 2023. My name. Although it was happening across town, but I guess I was supposed to be the main victim. I decided to go through each of the dates and names to see if the paper was legit. Many of the calendar dates had common names beside them. I typed the first one into Google to see which event it referred to. All that came up were official websites for various cities named Kingston. Advanced search parameters didn't help yield anything either. Kingston was such a common name, so of course nothing was going to come up. The 5 up the list only gave me the same lack of information, so was it a coincidence? I looked at each of the surnames, searching for a name that was familiar to me. One name stumped me. It wasn't a person's name, it was the Paris Catacombs. Just those 2 words with the date of September 16th, 1788 written beside them. Thing is, the Paris Catacombs weren't named the Catacombs until 1786, so the paper it was written on had to have been written around then rather than in 1529. At first, nothing came up about the Paris Catacombs on that date. There weren't even any legends from 1778 in general. I decided to put the search terms in quotation marks, but nothing came up. I put a website-specific search parameter beside it in the search bar. Nothing. I put that search query in quotation marks. I found something, at the very least. It was a post titled, Legends of the Paris Catacombs. The initial post asked for lesser-known legends from the catacombs. It seemed far-fetched, since legends always seem to trend and get overblown, but one of the comments suggested something else. My great-grandparents lived in France. They had a story that had been passed down for a couple of centuries that I've been told repeatedly throughout my whole life so far. Apparently, my grandpa's great-grandmother stumbled upon the catacombs and saw a yellow mist that moved on its own. She heard noises she had never heard before coming from deep inside the grave, and things she couldn't describe poked out of the mist. I always thought something like that would have made the news, but apparently nobody talked about it aside from her and 2 others, according to my grandpa. After a few dozen more empty searches, both with and without quotation marks, I came across one dated December 15th, 1900. It was named Flannan. Upon Googling it, I came across an event that happened on the date in which 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared off the coast of Scotland. Their disappearance remains a mystery to this day apparently. There are lots of articles about this. They're interesting. It turns out the cause really did seem unknown. Did it really just fly under the radar? Did some creepy thing just happen and nobody knew about it? Someone could have died and nobody would ever be able to find them again, and they wouldn't know why. The person who disappeared had to have known why. They experienced it firsthand. If they weren't dead but trapped, nobody would know. I felt cold thinking about it, so I moved on to the next familiar surname. Looking up, Roe, Mass. 1915 brought up images of a run-down house in Ohio. The origin of the house was unknown, but over the years, it was subjected to easily disprovable legends and accusations of paranormal activity. Between the 1850s and the 1910s, the property was owned by the Rugg family. That was the time most of the paranormal stuff was alleged to have occurred. I couldn't find anything about what supposedly happened there on March 10th, 1915. In fact, there was a general lack of verifiable information about anything that went on there. Looking up November 24th, 1974, Ackley Paranormal yielded results about a court case, one involving a house in New York that was ruled legally haunted by the New York Supreme Court back in 1991. The owner of a house that had a reputation of being haunted by ghosts had to admit to such a thing when selling the house. I couldn't find anything about what supposedly happened on November 24th, 1974. I emailed both the owners and the previous owners of the house, asking them if they knew what happened at the house on that day. One of them, I'm not going to say who for privacy, got back to me. This is what their message read. Is this a day you randomly selected? How did you get any clue that something happened then? I'm checking for a hoax, I responded. A hoax? Who told you? I guess word always gets out somehow. I'm not going to say a thing about what happened. It's too discomforting and I would sound insane, they replied. It was interesting there'd be something they didn't want to mention out of fear of sounding insane, since it was mentioned that ghosts casually interacted with those living in the house on a regular basis, especially during the 70s. The following calendar dates yielded the same type of thing, some with no event popping up in any search results, others in which an event that happened on the respective date did come up. Here are some dates that stood out to me for some odd reason. October 13th, 1986, Queen Anne. March 17th, 1995, East Shore. June 3rd, 2002, Bower. March 17th, 2005, Monte Vista. March 23rd, 2007, Ken. October 8th, 2008, Welland. November 11th, 2011, Morris. March 5th, 2014, Melee. October 4th, 2016, Grove. July 27th, 2022, Matthews and Livingston. And then that last one, January 1st, 2029, Alt Smith. I'm guessing the lack of room on the page was the reason it was the last one written, but if predating all those events was important, wouldn't there be another page? I mean, if it all happened to fit entirely on one page, that would be a nice coincidence. Either way, something was going to happen to an Alt Smith on the first day of 2029. My phone is making an unsettling erratic buzzing noise. I'm going to post this right now, then I'm going to figure out this anomaly. There's an absurd anomaly occupying my hometown. The FBI is covering it up until they've determined it's appropriate to release information about the anomaly and their investigation of it to the public. We can't access any social media or texting app, but we can still use search engines. They're everywhere: cups, plates, screens, any new plastic or metal, mouths with teeth, along with veins with a mind of their own. I've thrown away all my cups, most of my plates, and most of my electronics. I checked my car. Those little veins were popping out of the exhaust pipe. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I feel cold just thinking about it. And a list I randomly found one day, a list of dates, surnames, and names of towns, buildings, etc., written in 1528 predicted it. If I knew any better, I would have skipped town for the day, but I didn't. I wanted to know who wrote that list and where this anomaly was coming from, but I didn't know where to start. As I thought about my next steps, there was a knock at my front door. Answering it, I saw a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She looked panicked. Behind her, the fog was still as thick as it was when I first saw it. "There's something going down at the library," she said, breathing heavily. "What's this going to be?" I decided to go see what was up. The fog was still thick, so I navigated slowly. Once I arrived at the library, bright emergency lights flashed through the fog. There were voices and silhouettes, but I couldn't make much out with everybody speaking at once, and the fog. Then somebody began to shout over all the noise. "Back away. This is the epicenter of a matter-shifting anomaly. Get back." There was no use trying to see what was going on in there. I asked a man nearby what the hell was going on. He told me he didn't know, but then he told me he was told somebody had a recording of something going down on the basement floor. I was tempted to know what it was. The temptation overran any fear of what it might be, as I couldn't be afraid of something I just assumed. I asked other nearby bystanders about the supposed recording, anticipating a good answer. I had to have asked 15 people about the footage before a man who looked to be in his 20s claimed he had it. I asked him if I could watch it, explaining to him it's important people know what's going on. He took out his phone, navigated to the camera app, then held the phone up to my face. The cameraman was indeed in the basement floor of the library, filming a TV that was making a chilling screeching noise, topped off by repeated buzzing. The cameraman panned to a child who was backing away, with a frightened look on their face, then they panned back to the TV. Cracking and booming came from somewhere behind the cameraman, who turned around to film it. The floor had a noticeable crack in it. The cameraman walked closer but stopped feet away from it as it began to widen. The legs of one of the computer desks fell in, causing the computers to slide under the desk in front of it. It didn't matter anyway, because the computer screens each had mouths too. It was a light gray void with no noticeable walls. It just went on for infinity. As the cameraman filmed the void, the faintest irregular shapes could be seen squirming around. They got easier to make out as the seconds went by. As they got closer, you could see the detail. Dark gray and black squirming orifices that combined, then detached with one another. A pit formed in my stomach. I wanted to look away, but it was important to know what was going on right. As the thing peered its head into the room, the camera operator turned to the stairs and sprinted to the ground floor. There wasn't a person in sight. The camera operator bolted outside into the fog. The camera app crashed, then a fierce buzzing noise came from the phone's speakers. "Take the card out," I said. The guy pried his phone open, exposed veins detached from the back cover. The man looked inside and gave a look of disgust. He pulled the card out and dropped his phone onto the ground. With a look of determination, he stomped the phone until it had cracked and splintered. This town had gone under so fast, it was beyond my understanding. Being here was like being in a Lovecraft novel at this point. The only thing missing was a deranged cult that worshipped the sphere. I wasn't going to stick around for such horror, so I desperately walked along the sidewalk, through the fog, until reaching what I assumed was the forest based on how much I knew the area. I walked at a slow pace, trying to control my breaths. I was determined to get away from the town of horror, but had to watch out for tree trunks on my way through the densely foggy forest. The forest was a better option than walking along the sidewalk only to eventually be turned back by people in suits. I was hoping my hopes of escape weren't blind, but I knew it would make sense if agents were patrolling some area of the forest. Either way, I needed to take a chance for survival. As I continued walking through the thick forest of bushes and trees, I took note of anything I could hear. It sounded as if every bird in the world was chirping at the same time. I heard footsteps cracking branches towards me. Were these agents? Seconds later, I got my answer. "Hey," a male voice called out. "You an agent?" "No, I'm trying to get out of this godforsaken place," I said, almost losing my breath. "Okay, good," he said calmly. "We just need to speak to you." The sounds of their footsteps got louder, faster. Before I could process anything, a man knocked me in the head with a heavy object. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was enough to knock me out. I awoke sometime later, laying in some bushes. The fog was still thick, there was a sore spot on my neck, and my head hurt nonetheless. I picked myself up, confused, realizing it was getting dark. I didn't want to run into those madmen again, so I went back, jumping at every noise, just determined to get home and relax. On my way home, I stopped at the police station to report the madmen. They told me they'd keep an eye out for them. Hopefully the fog wasn't too thick for that. When was this shit going to end? Following along the sidewalk, gunshots rang out in the distance. Were people shooting at the mouthy creatures, or was that round squirmy abomination attacking the town? I picked up my pace, not knowing what was happening, but hoping for my dear life the madmen weren't taking over or some crazy shit. Along the way, I stepped on something soft. Chills ran down my spine. Looking back, I could see a faint mouth-shaped silhouette. I shuddered. Ew, that's disgusting. I kept walking. A minute later, I saw another one of them. I stopped, considering stepping around the creature. Instead, I stepped up to it and stomped on it again and again until I was sure it was dead. It was gross to make contact with it, but it was good to literally stomp out my fear. Once I was back home, I checked every room for mouth creatures. To my pleasure, there were none. I looked at the bottom of my shoe and saw a purple ooze had stained it. I took my shoes off and put on my now emergency shoes. I tucked my pants into my socks and my shirt into my pants in case any of the little creatures crawled onto me. Sometime that night I heard what sounded like somebody sliding a sheet of paper under my door. I went up to the door and found just that. Curious about it, I picked it up to read it. You're being followed by a dangerous fringe group. Meet me at Broad Saint tomorrow at noon. Those madmen wanted something. Once they found out I wasn't an agent, they knocked me out and did something with my neck, which was still sore. I was glad somebody was looking to deter the men, but damn it, what did they do with my neck? The next day, leading up to my walk to the other side of town, I used an old phone my neighbor had just lent me to Google the history of the town in hopes of finding a lead on who may have written the list of dates and names. I found out the first settlers were around in the 1700s, but the paper was written in the 1500s, so it must have been brought here all that time ago. I wish I could just understand what was written on the first 2 pages. I was pessimistic about translating the old text until I actually found out what language the text was in. After some Google foo, I found out the language was Old English. Before I could start copy-paste translating the old text, the phone I was using started buzzing like crazy, which made me jump. I went cold. No, damn it. Determined, I walked straight into the kitchen. This little shit wasn't going to get away. I pulled the back of the phone until it popped off, then I set both pieces in the sink. Veins were growing around the battery. I took the card out, then I plugged the sink and turned the water on hot. Now I have 2 cards. Great. During my mini-fit, the front door's knob began to shake, like somebody was trying to get in. I walked up to the door and looked through the tiny peephole. A woman my height, who very mysteriously looked like she was my twin, was standing on my doorstep. I opened the door, but before I could ask her if she needed something, she gave me a look of shock and confusion, as much as I was feeling in her presence. After a confusing conversation about who really lived at my house, the woman took out her ID and held it up to my face. It was an exact copy of mine. When I showed her mine, she too adopted a look of shock on her face. We exchanged a confused, awkward silence for a minute until the seemingly mirrored version of me started asking me personal questions. If you're me, what are my siblings' names? She asked. If you're me, you don't have any, I said. We went back and forth until she asked a rather specific question about a dog. She explained she named the dog Camilla and that something happened to it, something she only ever told her vet. It's quite personal, as I had been through the exact same thing with a dog bearing the same name. I'll just point out that I answered it correctly, 100%. I even brought up what breed the dog was and a detail she missed about its death. She adopted a look of pure surprise, looking as amazed as I felt, and I felt amazed as hell. We stared awkwardly at each other for a minute until I broke the silence. What? How did you get here? I asked. I got lost in the fog, she said. I accidentally walked into trees and cars until I fell into this endless gray void. I saw a hole and didn't know where I was until some agents told me to turn back. I told her about the footage I saw of a freakish creature poking up from a gray void. As I described the thing, her expression dropped. I saw that horrible thing, she said, shaking. I can't get it out of my head. It was just a floating ball of, I don't even know. It was interesting to get a full description of the thing, but I still couldn't wrap my mind around it. It could hover. It looked like it was alive. I led my other self inside. We both sat on the couch, amazed at whatever was happening between us. She pulled out a phone. I explained to her what happened to the 2 phones I had. She told me she found hers on the side of the road. She tapped an app that had a purple sphere as a logo. It brought her to an error screen. "Oh God," she said, "now Nova isn't working." "Nova?" I asked. I had never heard of Nova before. My first thought was that it was just some app I've never heard of. "You don't know it?" she asked. "It's like the most well-known search engine." "That's Google though," I said. She gave me a look of confusion. Maybe she was from a reality where Google never existed. I told her to download Google. Once she did, she had the hugest look of bewilderment as she opened the app, and it brought her to the search page. "I never heard of this before," she said. "I mean, if that's different for you, I wonder what else is, and why that gut-tearing thing opened up portals to different realities," I said, amazed that that was even possible. I always thought it was a theory with no evidence to prove or disprove, but here we are. She explained the situation with the fog and freaky mouths had happened in her reality, which I nodded my head to, signaling it was happening here too, not that it wasn't obvious. Then she started naming historical events like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Challenger explosion, and 9/11, which I confirmed had happened here too. She told me she was relieved this reality wasn't so different from her own. At around 11:30 a.m., I explained to her the sheet of paper I got from a mysterious person. She told me she got the same letter. We both decided to get ready for the half-hour walk. As we got ready, I told her I was glad she didn't come from a reality where she was a mean person. Who knows what would be going down if she was a terrible version of me. When we got to the address, I knocked on the door. Opening it was a man in black clothing. He introduced himself as Grayson, then let us in right away. My other self and I found a spot to sit and got comfortable. The man paced around for a couple seconds as we waited for him to give us whatever info he wanted to give us. "Okay," he sighed. "I might as well tell you. I was less sure that I wanted to tell you, because you're regular people, but you're both being followed by them, so here it goes. There's something rising up, so to speak. To focus on this specific case, there's a creature, an abomination is a better way to put it, rising up from under this town, and it's all thanks to a group of psychotic people." I could only think of the creature I saw in the library footage. "Is it a sphere with squirming life forms on it?" Grayson's eyes widened. "Yes," he said. "You came in contact with it." "Well, no," I said. I told him about the video from earlier. As I finished explaining what I saw, he sighed in relief. My other self told him she saw it while falling through the void she talked about earlier. "You didn't touch it, did you?" Grayson asked, resting his hand on his right pocket. "No," said my other self. "I wasn't close enough." Grayson sighed in relief, then continued explaining. "There's no use trying to deeply explain that sphere of abomination. It exists the way it does for a reason we can't know, but there are a couple of things we do know about it, at least. Wherever it goes, those mouth creatures we've been seeing are a result of its presence. There's a group that summoned the sphere through technology, not seen by anybody else in this reality." This was interesting but strange at the same time. He continued to explain. "We're positive they got this technology from an alternate reality, but we don't know which one, and we don't know how they gained the ability to hop realities." So, not only was reality hopping a thing, but there were realities where unseen technology existed and could be used as an upper hand. What I was hearing gave me a sinking feeling, especially with how professional and convincing the tone of Grayson's voice was. "Why do they want to summon that?" my other self asked, visibly recoiling as she spoke of the sphere. "It's being used as a rope. Grayson said, gesturing as if he was holding an actual rope. It's connecting one reality to the other, but telepathically, you are an alternate version of this reality's you. The fact you even found that slip is a sign another connection was made. But it doesn't stop there. It hasn't started yet, but there's an effort from a cult to pull a certain reality closer to this one. A loud knock was heard at the door. "We can hear you in there," said a male voice in an unusually soft tone. "We don't want a war, we just want the subjects." Grayson's eyes widened. He leaned towards me and whispered into my ear, "They're not going to leave us alone. Get into the safe room in the basement. The password is 3821. As Grayson leaned towards the ear of my other self, I got up and ran to a nearby open door with stairs leading downward. I switched the light on, spotting the metal door, along with a keypad to the right of it. As I jogged down the stairs, I looked back and saw my other self sprinting towards the stairs. There was another bang at the door, that time much louder. A pit was forming in my gut, especially as it dawned on me this anomaly is in town because some crazy people wanted to connect a certain reality to this one. But what reality? Hopefully I'll find out at some point. What I also want to know is what Grayson's plan was, if he had one. There's no way he brought us here for no reason. But now, the maniacs are here. That sheet of paper, the one with the dates, I wish it were more precise. Once I reached the keypad, I punched the password in. The text on the lock changed, telling us the door was unlocked. I pulled the handle, successfully opening the door, then stepped into the safe room. I turned around to make sure my other self was in the room. She was. At the height of my adrenaline, I grabbed the handle and slammed the door shut. Then I re-entered the password on the interior padlock. Looking around, I saw a security center at the back of the room, multiple bags, a fridge, and a portable toilet. The security center had 3 screens, with the one on the left being cracked, with purple liquid dripping out of a small hole. I stepped up to the buttons and hit what I could only assume was the power button. A security feed from the living room began broadcasting from the center screen, while a security feed from the kitchen began broadcasting from the screen to the right. In the living room, Grayson was standing at his front door, gesturing like he was talking to somebody. He had to have been talking, but I couldn't hear anything. The feed was muted. Looking over all of the buttons on the dashboard, I found what looked to be a volume button. It refused to work when pressing it. Other me began to speak in a shaky tone, talking about our location. I turned my head to see she was talking on the phone. She said thanks and hung up, then told me she had just called the police. Good. It'll be interesting to see how that goes down. The front door was pushed right off its hinges, crashing to the carpeted floor. 4 pale people, 2 men and 2 women, stepped inside, aiming chrome-plated rifles up to the man's head. Grayson stood back, but kept his hands to his sides. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and held it up in front of the gunman. Still, we couldn't hear what was going on at all. Grayson began gesturing again, but then the 3 gunmen shot him in the chest. A pink mist spewed out of his upper back, and he tumbled to the ground, holding his chest tightly. Worst of all, in his defeat, he laid on his back, so we both saw the life drain from his helpless eyes. I exchanged looks with my other self, who looked just as terrified as I felt inside. I don't know what's about to happen next. These maniacs want something from my other self and so I'm hoping they don't kill us. As for why they need us, I haven't figured that out yet. But when I do, I hope I don't get hurt by them or their nightmarish floating ball or the dread-inducing mouth creatures triggered by it. It's time to dive back into the sheet of paper that predicted this, the paper with the dates and names. Why was it hidden underneath my floor? Why did I have to be subject to one of the many events it hinted at? And why was I the main victim? I'm definitely the victim of a mad group or cult, but what exactly points to me being the main victim? Also, I still needed to translate the first 2 pages as well. My other self and I, standing by the security station, watched as the 4 gun-wielding cultists walked through the living room. I looked around for anything that could be of use, but unfortunately, nothing in the room would be enough to ward off the intruders. I was relieved when 4 police officers stepped in with their guns drawn. They stood in one spot for about a minute before opening fire, but all fell in the span of a second. My heart sank watching them fall and seeing their blood pile up on the carpet. The keypad glitched out, then 3 seconds later, the handle turned. I froze. "Don't worry," I said to my other self, shaking. "I'll just ask them what they want." The door swung open. The 4 gunmen stood right outside, 3 of them aiming right at us. I rested my hands on my hips, hoping this would end in good spirits. "Please step out of the room," said a woman on the far left. "We want to do this peacefully. Come with us." "What do you want from us specifically?" I asked in a shaky tone. "It's best we tell you in a safe place," said the woman. "Well, this is a safe room," I said. "A place alternate versions of ourselves wouldn't be able to break into," said the woman. "If you want to do this peacefully, why are you aiming guns right at us?" I asked. "Being scary is how we persuade," said the woman. "If you aren't fearing for your life, you won't do what we say." These people were downright creepy. I felt the need to keep talking so I could ease the tension within me. "Can you explain the sphere that popped up in the library?" I asked, shaking. "It's a rope between worlds," she said. "I mean, what is it made of?" I asked. "That's none of your business," she said. There it was, not knowing something filling me with dread. "Please, just tell me," I asked. "No," the gunman said in unison. 4 police officers hurried down the stairs into the basement and told the 4 gunmen to drop their weapons. One of the men told the officers the BS about being peaceful, then the officers opened fire at them. A red mist flew out of the heads of 2 of the gunmen. The 2 who survived, one of the men and one of the women, shot at the officers, sending them all to the floor. "Why aren't there guns in here?" asked my other self. "What?" I asked. "We don't need guns." "Come on," said my other self. "You know we do. I know you know we do." She was right. I wanted this to end peacefully, but self-defense was integral. The 2 remaining gunmen turned to us. "Don't you want to get out of town?" asked the woman. "Away from all the creatures." They were trying to persuade me. I was consumed by dread. I didn't know what to even do. Backup had to arrive at some point, and maybe they could take out the remaining gunmen who were still adamant about taking me to some place. "Where do you want to take us?" asked my other self. "We'll show you," said the male gunman. "Not enough," I said. "Just tell me where you want to take us." I began to hear more sirens. They blared louder and louder as the seconds passed. The 2 gunmen exchanged looks, then they put their rifles on their backs. For a couple seconds, I was both relieved and confused. I got my answer when they each pulled out a small handgun or taser. They pulled the triggers, sending an electric shock through my body. I fell to the ground. The gunmen dragged us across the cold basement floor, over the bodies that reeked an atrocious smell, and up the stairs. As the sound of marching boots rushed in, the gunmen dropped us on the stairs, reached for their rifles, and opened fire down the hallway. I was left on my stomach, so I had a good view. They put gas masks on as smoke filled the doorway. I couldn't move my hands, so I coughed like hell as the smoke entered my lungs. My eyes watered up as well, so I couldn't see what was happening anymore. Luckily, I could move my fingers again, then, within seconds, my hands, feet, arms, legs. And once I could move every part of my body, I lifted myself up. My eyes and throat were still stinging, so I crawled down the steps until it calmed. I noticed my other self was crawling down with me. I won't forget how red her face was. The gunfight was still going by the sound of it, so I rested my head on the steps and waited it out. The gunshots rang out for another minute before everything went silent. My other self and I reached into each of the pockets of the cultists. The men had phones, wallets, and folded papers. The women only had folded papers. We read each of the papers, only to find out they each read the same thing. "Your truth doesn't exist. Only Knots' truth." Knots? Who or what is that? Why is it spelled that way? We climbed up the stairs, then, cautiously, I peeked around the corner. Another one of the gunmen was laying on the ground on the other end of the hallway with 4 holes in his upper back. Some officers were laying further away. My heart sank. As I looked at the horrible sight, I noticed a sheet of paper lying in between one of the officers' bodies and a door to what I guessed was a closet. Assuming it was the page Grayson was holding up, I told other me I was going to go fetch it. She asked me what I'd do if one of the gunmen was right around a corner. My heart sank at that possibility, so I grabbed one of the officers' guns, stepped over the 3 bodies, and plugged my nose to keep out the atrocious smell. Once I made it to the other side of the hallway, I bent down, jolted my head as I swore I thought I saw something moving in the corner of my eye, picked the sheet up, then tiptoed back to the basement door where I read what was on the paper. It was a bunch of random symbols. There was no way I was going to understand any of it. My other self told me she too was confused about it. I slid the note into my pocket. I thought we were in the clear until my other self opened the front door. There was a blurred covering on the other side, blocking the exit. I reached out to touch it. It was hard plastic, fused with the door frame and the floor. We tried pushing it, punching it, cutting it, but nothing worked. We checked the other doors and the windows for a safe exit, but the same hard plastic covered those exits too. My heart sank. We were trapped inside. My other self called the police, then she told me the police said they were currently outside, trying but failing to get in. Great, why? I didn't ask for this, and that smell was getting bad. Once we found something to cover our noses with, I told my other self about the pages I found underneath my floorboards. She had a look of disappointment on her face as she responded by telling me she wishes she could read them. I assured her, telling her I took pictures of them. All I needed to do was translate the first page for now, then the second one after we're done processing the first. I looked up an image text to text converter. Once I found one, I used it to convert the Old English writing on the first page to regular text. Then I put it through an online translator. This is what it read. If you're reading this, it's because I'm stuck in the past. I'm from an alternate reality in which I worked with an organization who tracked anomalies across North America. They were called Aratali, a powerful organization established in 2025 that was widely regarded with respect across the world. In the 10 years preceding the organization's creation, the rate of anomaly-type events across North America went down by 70%. Similar organizations were set up in other parts of the world, operating on different continents. 10 years after their creation, anomalies-type events went down by 80% worldwide. Creepy creatures were becoming a thing of the past. Governments guarded slips to different realities like they were atomic bombs. They were far worse than that though, I promise. In 2050, the US, China, UK, and South Africa all released reports about the most dangerous alternate realities, the HETR report. You won't believe the stuff described in those documents. A reality where a laser that turned entire planets into hellholes had hit Earth. A reality in which the second you enter, you get torn to shreds by the wind. Realities featuring invasions of all different kinds. And militaries did their best to keep the monstrosities from those places away from our reality. All was good until a psychopath showed up and destroyed everything we had. Her name was Erilyn Campbell. In 2056, she arrived and assassinated every head, every guard, and fried every server. Apparently, that wasn't enough because she then stole our technology. In the span of 10 days after her reign of crime, killer creatures had poured out of every slip in the world, to the extent anomalies went up by 50%. We chased after her. We actually managed to find her in a reality where a giant jellyfish-like creature was floating above the Arctic Circle. From what I heard, that is. My team got eaten by a creature I cannot begin to explain, but I kept going, running from all the other scary stuff that inhabited that reality, including people in gray robes who kept talking about this godlike thing called notes. Possible spelling error there as I'm going off of pronunciation. I called it weird, so they sent three-eyed humanoids after me. I hadn't run so fast in my life. We made it to a town named Bradford, in Ontario, Canada. I found Erilyn sitting on her porch. When she saw me, she looked back at her phone with a bored expression on her face. I took out my badge and held it up for her to notice. She looked up from her phone, eyed the badge, then got up from her chair and walked over to me. I told her exactly where I was from and told her I wasn't going to take any excuses for her behavior. She reminded me of Black Widow a little bit. She had a mostly deadpan vocal tone and, based on security footage from back at HQ, was quite stealthy, but she was a terrible person. She tased me, took my wallet, and tore up all of its contents right in front of me. She told me I wasn't going to be needing any of it where I was going. Ari sent me to a reality where everything was seemingly fine, but then she sent me back in time to that reality's past. When I found out what era I was in, all I could mutter was "fuck you." Dirt roads, horses, stone buildings out of the mid-second millennium. I was nervous, but my worst fear was realized when I saw the date. April 2nd, 1520. She sent me to a time period over 500 years into the past. I didn't blend in at all for the first few years. I couldn't understand Old English, my shirt had a 21st century logo, my general style looked nothing like the style everyone else was wearing. Luckily, I managed to impress people through artistic works, so I didn't stay homeless for long. No, I'm not actually Leonardo da Vinci, and unfortunately, I never ended up becoming famous for my work. But hey, at least I enjoyed it. Of course, aside from those times where I painted just to settle my dread. Lots of dread over many different things. One thing I haven't mentioned was failing and not making enough money to live, then getting stalked by some serial killer because of the vulnerability I would have. I was glad I got to make enough money to get a house at all, otherwise I'd have to steal, and getting caught would mean being put in jail. I was not curious about the condition of 1500s era jails. I hid my phone from everybody in fear I'd be seen as some otherworldly being. Once my battery died, that was it for me using the Notes app. I still keep it with me though. After all, it's my phone. Some of the words and names I'm writing don't exist in this time period. I wrote about the US above. What the hell is that in 1528? It doesn't exist yet. I'm praying somebody comes to rescue me. I'm in my 40s. If I don't catch the bubonic plague, I should live to see at least the 1580s. Hooray, that is unless I'm missing some facts. I never looked into biology and medicine all that much. I'm still scared shitless of catching a disease. I've probably used too much soap by now. Living in the 1500s is terrifying for a time traveler with no way home whatsoever. If you're reading this and you have the tech necessary, travel back in time to June 17th, 1528, 2 days after I'm writing this, and meet me at address London, England. We can fight Erilyn and her cronies in her home reality. Here's some proof. Here are the dates of every major anomalous event that took place from 1528 through 2028, with an important extra entry from 2029. Written beside each are the names of relevant people and places. June 15th, 1528. This was chilling to read. Imagine being sent back to the 1500s with absolutely nothing to do about it. No home or job either. Everyone you know is far from being born. Is Erilyn the head of the wild cult hunting me down? Is she the reason I'm trapped in this house? A pit formed in my stomach as I thought, what if she comes here? And the reality with the creature over the Arctic Circle. Is that one of the realities being brought closer to ours? Notes is and knots. I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence. That's just hope though. I also hope I don't starve to death in this house after all the food runs out. No, they want me for some reason. They very likely have backup. If it turns out they do, hopefully they'll lose and fail to make it to where I am. I'm currently hiding somewhere with my other self in case that happens. I'm not going to follow their cult. They brought a dark squirmy sphere here. I got a sinking feeling thinking about just now, and they might be worshipping a giant jellyfish-like creature they want to bring closer to here. I just can't anymore. I'm cold. I hope the cultists don't find us. It's weird how that was the first page, but it read like it should have been the second. At least, the bit at the end. Unfortunately, I don't have time to translate the second page to see what's up, as there's a banging coming from downstairs now. I am not sure why any of it happened. It just did, out of nowhere. Hopefully this is the last update. I was hiding, stopping myself from breathing loudly as the sound of footsteps got louder and louder. My other self was covering her face as she lied to my left. I had a view of the bottom of the bedroom door through the crack between the blanket hanging off the bed and the soft carpet floor. The door was knocked right off its hinges, filling my guts with more dread. "You two can come out now," said a feminine voice. "I'm not one of those cultists, I promise." I exchanged looks with my other self. I didn't want to move. I wasn't just going to trust some random person. How did they get into the house when we couldn't? If the answer was advanced weaponry, that still ticked me off considering I hadn't heard of a rescue team on par with the cultists. And if it was a rescue team, they should give at least one sign. The blanket was lifted, which was something I should have expected. A woman with black hair who looked to be in her late 20s looked where we were, her eyes widening as she noticed us. My eyes widened as well, my heart dropping as she looked at me. "You two can come out now," she said. "The occultist should be gone for a good few hours." She took out what looked to be an official government badge, with her face and credentials and everything. Her name, Erilyn Campbell. I crawled out from under the bed and stood up. My other self followed suit. "How'd you get in here?" I asked. "Knocking, portals," she said. "Portals?" I asked. "Do you know anything about a sphere of monstrosity that had risen inside the library?" "Yes," she said. "It's my next target. Those damn occultists don't know what's inside that thing. Oh, hold on a second. I'll be back shortly." The agent took out a white remote and pressed one of the buttons. A white light appeared and expanded to about twice the width of a human. The agent stepped into it, then a second or two later, it disappeared. "Whoa," I said, looking at my other self. She had a look of amazement on her face. "Yeah, that was interesting." A moan echoed from downstairs, sending chills down my spine. Was that a cultist? My other self was pale already. "Maybe it was an officer," she said. "Yeah, that's what I'd do," I said, almost smiling. "Why not assume the best if you can't tell if something is signaling anything bad or good?" A silence fell between us as I heard the sound of a gun being cocked. We both got back under the bed and my other self covered herself in clothing. I did the same. Their footsteps got louder and louder. It's possible this person heard us talking in here. If so, he probably heard exactly where our voices were coming from. I remained as quiet as possible, just in case this person was a cultist. I saw some shoes along the floor. They stopped, and a loud gunshot made my other self and I scream. The bed sheet was lifted, and a pale-faced man looked under the bed. He had a jellyfish tattoo on his face. He let the bedsheet go, then I watched on, adrenaline rising, as he walked over to my side of the bed. He lifted the bedsheet, and I saw his silhouette. It was somehow freakier than his actual face. "Get out," he said. "We're going now." I was frozen. I bet my other self was as well. She's me after all, and through all of this, I only barely got to be light about it. The man pulled away each of the clothes that were covering me, grabbed my arm, and tugged me out from under the bed. "No," I screamed. The man pushed me onto the bed. He took out an older-looking phone and showed me videos that will probably stick with me. The first video began with the camera operator filming the Statue of Liberty up close. They zoomed out, revealing a red UFO or something hovering above the bay, taking up most of the sky. It had a dozen pulsating bumps hanging off of it. The camera operator zoomed out further, revealing this living UFO had a black trim and was shaped like a triangle. It looked far from CGI or an AI-generated video. The video looked impossible to fake. The living UFO hovered eastward. It was so odd. The second video showed a group of 8 people in gray robes sitting around a table, talking and laughing. It looked like they were in the CN Tower observation deck. I could see what looked to be the shoreline, but with different buildings lining the shoreline. At one point, one of the robed men stood up. The others went silent, then the robed man spoke. "Tonight, we celebrate the 5th year of Note's presence," he said. "Anybody who opposes us will be subject to the following." I love this list: electric poking, beating, forced teaching. It was a surreal video. The cultishness of the group gave me goosebumps. As he kept listing the punishments, I realized more so that I shouldn't type them. Another thing was the mention of notes. I had heard it before. I recalled reading about a creature named Knots before entering the bedroom in the first place, along with a woman named Erilyn Campbell from an alternate reality. Were these videos from her reality? Was this man a member of that cult? The third video was a rear-end point of view of a truck speeding up a road at night. The rear headlights illuminated the road. A sprinting creature, almost looked like a tree but very animalistic, followed behind. It was an uncanny thing to see, in appearance and the erratic way its body moved as it ran. The video ended. Then the man slid his phone back into his pocket while asking me a question that troubled me. "Are you ready for all of that?" What? What even were those things?" I asked. I didn't want to be dragged into whatever hellhole I just saw. Is that really where these cultists want to take me? The dread was piling up inside me. There was no way out of this. I began to tear up as the weight of this situation got heavier. The man gave me a devious smirk. "Why do you need me specifically?" I asked. "That's not a simple question to answer. How did you even find me?" "We were able to stick a tracking chip in your neck. I bet the soreness has worn off by now." That answered the neck question. But what about my other self? I guess the cultist didn't notice her when pulling me, or he was doing this one at a time. My question was answered as he told me to scoot to the corner of the bed, and as I did so, he reached underneath the bed and pulled my other self out. She screamed as he made her sit down on the bed. The cultist showed her the same videos and asked her the same question. Before she answered, I saw a light in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw what looked to be a portal floating in front of the closet. It was back. That agent stepped back out, making eye contact with me, then looking over my shoulder, adopting a look of surprise. She jumped back into the portal, then stepped back out with a handgun and aimed it over my shoulder. "Set these people free," said the agent. "If you do, you can go back to your reality, but be monitored rather than sent to prison." "I don't need to worry about that," said the cultist. "No matter what you do to me, Knots will be watching." "I guess whatever helps your psyche," said the agent. "Tell me what you're going to do in this town." "As if this is the only town we've been popping up in," said the cultist, giggling monotonously. "Oh really, creepy man," said the agent. "I'm not telling you anything more," said the cultist. The agent pulled the trigger. The cultist tumbled to the floor. With a look more straight-faced than what would seem normal, the agent dragged Mr. Cultist into the portal. The cultist was frozen, mumbling on his way. A minute later, the agent stepped back out of the portal. To my delight, she told us she was going to get us out of here. She walked us down the stairs. Once we got to the living room, she blew a hole into the wall between the front door and the window. She stepped through the hole and we followed. Lights flashed through the fog, but no one was making any noise. The agent stood close to us and pulled out her phone. Teeth were sticking out of the screen. What is happening here? The agent asked herself. The phone buzzed, falling out of the agent's hands and landing with a thud on the concrete. Once a clearing opened up in the fog, I could see red veins squirming out of the charging port. My stomach clenched at the sight. The agent stomped on the phone over and over and over, cracking the screen and splintering the case until purple fluid was oozing out of the charging port. And each side, the fog thickened until the damaged phone was no longer visible. The next thing she did was walk us to the library, telling us to keep quiet on the way. I dreaded going in there to witness the sphere. How does it react when somebody approaches it? Does it give off an overbearing energy? This was overwhelmingly uncertain. Once we arrived, I told the agent I was anxious to my core about going in. She gave me a hesitant look. "Well, one of you have to go in with me, the other has to stay back and help keep the cultists away from the doors. Just remember how vile they are." I did have the mental energy to do some shit to the very thing the cultists were using to take this town over and spread their terrifying ideas. I decided to go through with it. "Okay, I'll go in. Just make sure I'm really prepared." Agent Campbell nodded. "Since I'm more experienced, I'll be doing most of the work. I'll be weakening the sphere while you shoot anything that shouldn't exist to buy me more safety. When the sphere is weakened enough, it'll extend 2 of its appendages. All I know about these appendages is that they're vital to it whenever it's life-threateningly weak. We need to grab them and yank them off of its body. For this mission, you'll be given a weapon and gloves to protect your skin. If I had more time, I could have gotten us some full-body suits for this, which would have been way safer. We will die at the hands of occultists if we don't do this. Yes, me too, but that's a story for another day. We must be very careful. Don't let a single thing from that sphere touch your skin." I gave her an understanding nod, then I asked her what the effects on skin are. "A virus that destroys every cell it can spread to. I fucking wish we had enough time to get full body suits." Upon reaching the library, my alternate self took her position. My heart was already dropping by the time I reached the main entrance. As the agent opened the door, it dropped further. Beyond the first 2 rows of book-filled bookshelves was a dark, pulsating mass stretching beyond each of the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The next moments felt really slow-paced, so I'll sum them up the best I can. Agent Campbell told me to station myself in the corner to my right. I sped by the bookshelves until I reached the corner. There were 4 corridors, 1 between the wall and a bookshelf to my right, 5 between the 6 bookshelves, and the one I just walked through. I shook, anticipating the first shot. Less than a minute later, I heard the nastiest pop. Gunshots followed. I glanced down every corridor, then I double-checked, then I triple-checked. Soon enough, a square-shaped spider was crawling down the corridor to my right. Before I could aim at it, the thing fired one of its appendages at me. It was dark, string-like, and ended in a hook shape. It was like a mini harpoon, if harpoons were biological. I dove to my left, watching as the hook pierced a poster on the wall. It retracted, falling to the floor, then it bounced towards me. It nearly reached my feet by the time I could act. I dove away in between 2 of the bookshelves. I sprinted for a couple seconds, turned back, and aimed at the area of floor by the wall. I expected to see the hook, but the damn spider or, well, spiderish thing crawled by instead. Shivers ran down my spine. I fired at it. Not a second later, it splattered. Dark purple blood landed all over the carpet, along with the trim of the wall. I turned around. Another 4 of those things were sitting feet away from me, likely furious about me killing one of their own. I fired almost blindly, not caring which one I got first. Each one I hit splattered. For a split second, I thought I hit them all. Then a hook flew at my arm, piercing the side of my shirt and missing my skin by a thread. I aimed and fired. Splat. I backed away. I needed to take the bio-harpoon out with my gloves, but it was dangerously close to my skin. I pinched it and pulled it away from my arm, then I pulled it out of my shirt and flung it onto the carpet. The floor shook. Some of the books fell onto the carpet. I sprinted until reaching an opening, a corridor. I looked down to see what was up with the sphere. It was moving up and down repeatedly. Agent Erilyn spoke from wherever she was at that point. Okay, it should be ready. A long, pulsating snake-like being squirmed by. I had to touch that shit. The floor shook again. I just went for it. I gripped it and pulled for my life. I swore this had to be like a pinch to the sphere, but maybe this thing wasn't like I assumed it was. What if it was something more? Agent Erilyn knew, but not me. It already appeared to be bothered. Maybe this was it. After a minute of tugging, I heard a squishy ripping sound. The arm came off. I tumbled to the floor, pushing the thing away from me. That didn't seem to be it. The sphere was still moving. In my nervous plateau, 2 arms wrapped around my neck and held me back. A deep voice spoke into my ear. Fuck all that they've told you. As my heart sunk even further, Agent Erilyn spoke. It's beaten down enough. We need to leave. The man covered my mouth. This had to happen, didn't it? Couldn't all of this have just not happened? You know what's coming. Let's watch together. The man turned so that he would be standing behind the bookshelf while I stood in line of where most of the sphere's shit would spew. The deep pit of dread in my gut grew far stronger. I tried to fight his grip, knowing he was too strong, but he kicked me and told me to get onto the floor while keeping his grip tight. I kneeled down, beginning to tear up. I laid down on my right side, with my head being the only thing not behind the bookshelf. The man kneeled on my left side. I can only say he was a heavy piece of shit. I managed to get a look at him too. He was wearing a cloak, with most of his head covered. His face would be safe so long as he didn't look directly at the sphere. I watched with dreadful anticipation as he hid his hands in the sleeves of his cloak. I looked at the sphere as it pulsated faster and faster. I got lightheaded. Tears were streaming down my face. This was all already so surreal. I hope to God this was a dream. During my fit of despair, I heard a groan coming from the man. In pure hope, I looked at him. He was struggling to keep his grip enough that I could wiggle a bit. He tumbled off of me. Adrenaline rushed through me. I stood up and kicked him, leaving some purple guts and blood on his cloak as his face reddened. Wondering what was happening, I looked to my right, and noticed a familiar thin appendage on the floor. I followed it back to one of those spiders. Agent Erilyn did mention the cultists only knew the outside of the sphere. I sprinted for my life between and around the bookshelves until reaching the exit. I didn't look back. I pushed the doors open, sprinted down the steps, then ran through the fog. I heard a disgusting burst along with the shattering of a bunch of glass. This had to be over, right? I stopped and took deep breaths. The fog began to lighten. I could see the silhouettes of nearby cars and houses, then their colors. As I sighed in relief, two men in suits ran up to me. "You need to tell us exactly who you are and who you're affiliated with." Agent Campbell ran up to me. "Well, my name is Erilyn Campbell," said the agent. "As for my affiliates, how about I write a report for you guys?" The agents expressed confusion, but Agent Campbell explained who I was, who she herself was, what was done, and why. The men in suits told us we had to go in for questioning, which we obliged to. As we walked with the agents, all I could think about was the Erilyn Campbell I read about. The one who tanked an entire world's creature-fighting economy. Erilyn walked up to me. I gave her a look of confusion. "You good?" Erilyn asked. "There was an agent with the exact same name as you who destroyed an entire world and sent somebody back to the 1500s, I said. "At least, according to a document." She gave me a look of confusion. "What document?" "There are plenty of documents that shit talk me." "A document I translated after I found it under my floorboards." Those guys were using monster fighting organizations as a disguise to build some business empire, Erilyn said, rolling her eyes. "So they were the bad guys here." "Terrible guys, yes, so many accusations of human rights violations and manipulation. They took care of 1% of all the creatures slipping into their reality and made up grand numbers to make them look bigger." I was relieved to hear Erilyn wasn't a piece of shit, but not so much that I fell for a 500-year-old lie. I then spoke to her about the third page, the one with the predictions on it. I explained how it was written and when the predictions ended. She smirked. He wanted to convince people he was right so badly, he sat down and vaguely predicted every anomalous event that would happen to your reality, even though nobody was going to save him. Must have been his last resort. Predict the future and maybe some time travelers will think you're trapped in the past. Little does he know, time is a mathematical construct. I simply just threw him into your reality. He's long dead now. Hey, did he predict the thing that just happened to this town? Yes, correct date and my actual surname. What's the next date? One of the agents cut us off. That's some stuff you two are talking about there, but let's save the information for the questioning session. I'm not allowed to say anything really about the questioning session or anything else. Yes, there were other things and I know I'm spilling all the information, but I'm not risking anything with this. I asked them how much I could say about the stuff prior to me being taken in, then they smirked and told me there was no way anybody would believe it, so go to town. As for everything that happened, my alternate self is no longer around. She has to stay with the FBI. She and I will be questioned together by another organization soon, but I haven't been told which one. Other than that, I feel weird about new phones now. I might stick to older models for a while. Hopefully, the FBI will release information about this event to the public. I just got a letter from them reminding me not to share pictures or videos of the black ooze, purple ooze, freaky mouths, or the sphere of monstrosity. It ended with the usual note. The FBI will release information regarding this anomaly to the public once it has determined it is appropriate to do so. It is now December 30th, 2023. Prior to this edit, I mentioned my job was to stand outside the library and do nothing. That's not what happened at all. What you read is what really happened. I was confused as to how and when to tell you, but nerves got the better of me. In the last 7 months, my town has been recovering. We still haven't gotten any word from the FBI about anything. I hope the town gets word soon. As for the final prediction on the sheet of paper, I asked Erilyn what it might be. She told me it's too vague to draw anything from, but based on her experiences, it may either be pointing to the emergence of a large being that unknowingly influences people or something from one of the realities. The creatures that spilled into the 1528 man's home reality originated from. Either way, we could be looking at an alteration of civilization we aren't likely to survive.